I once had a dream that I was a giant wheel of cheese. I lived in an aging cellar with several thousand other cheeses of all sorts and sizes. Now, this may sound weird, but out of all of the cheeses, I knew that I was God's favorite. Maybe God loved me the most because I was the oldest and most mature, or simply because I was the biggest and cheesiest. But God definitely loved me more than any of the other cheeses. You may not believe in God, but I've met him. He created me, the world I live in, and everyone I live with. It may seem obvious to you that God was clearly just a cheesemaker with an aging cellar, but to my cheesy consciousness, there was no doubt that he was God Almighty. Now, every day, God would come into the cellar, not only to check on his creations, but also to make new ones. And as we all know, cheese is made from milk. All of us cheeses were made from milk. But what you might not know is that, at first, we were all afraid to change from milk into cheese. We were convinced that if we left our bodies, the milk jars we were contained in, we would surely die. And if we somehow survived, we would no longer be milk, but be something completely different. Furthermore, none of us even knew if we were going to become cheese. Some of us became yogurt, butter, or worst of all, cheese that was unworthy of aging. But either way, we eventually all faced our fate and became who or what we are today. However, this new generation of milk seems to never want to change, and God seems to allow it. Every time God is about to transform this new generation of milk, they all scream, "No, no, please, I don't want to change. Please, I want to be milk forever." Now, don't get me wrong. My generation said the same thing, myself included. But like I said, eventually, we all changed. I was beginning to be quite fed up with this new generation of milk, and I was thinking of having a word with God about it. But that morning, God came down with a different kind of milk. It was mother's milk, and that could only mean one thing. God had a child. Knowing that God had a child filled me with so much joy. I no longer cared about this new generation of milk and their refusal to change. And just when I thought that God had filled me with as much joy as was cheesily possible, God brought down another container of mother's milk, and then another, and then another, until it seemed like God must have populated a whole nother universe with all his children. And I've never seen God so happy. But then, one day, God stopped bringing down the mother's milk. which would mean that God might start giving his children some milk from this new generation, which would be fine. But this new generation of milk has refused to change for so long that it clearly must be spoiled by now. So I asked around as to how old this new generation of milk was, and you would not believe what the other cheeses told me. Apparently, somehow, some way, this new generation of milk was older than me. That could not be possible. I was by far the most mature cheese in the entire cellar. Yet this new generation of milk was older than me? Milk that was older than the most mature cheese in the cellar was clearly spoiled and rotten. And if God's children were to consume it in any form, they would clearly become infected and sick, if not worse. So I decided that the next morning I would have to warn God about this rotten, spoiled milk. But when God came down the next morning, before I had a chance to say anything, God took me away from the cellar and brought me into another world. In this new world, I was instantly sold off to a man whom I can only presume to be Satan himself. For the devil took me home to his world, where he and his fellow demons sliced apart my body and devoured each piece of me with the agonizing gnashing of their jagged teeth. And as they swallowed me, I thought that my consciousness would be wiped out. But to my horror and dismay, I remained fully aware while my body was broken down by their burning stomach acids. Then, being horribly compacted by their intestine until I became shit. And when I was finally excreted, I lay there as shit upon the hard floor, never to return to the earth, never to become fertilizer for the soil, but to remain as a pile of shit for all eternity. But then I woke up, and I realized that was all a dream. But right away, I heard God coming down into the cellar. So without even thinking, somehow I managed to heave myself from my place and roll into a special spot in the cellar where God could never find me. However, without God's care and love, I soon started to rot inside. And before I knew it, I was overcome by mold and suffered an even more horrific and torturous death than when I was in the hands of Beelzebub. Miraculously, that too was a dream. So this time, when God came down and stood before me, I said, "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you." And God smiled. Don't ask me how, but God had heard my words. And he said to me that his Father told him that one day he would hear words of wisdom from a great, noble, and mature cheese. And these words from this cheese shall henceforth be the words of prayer that he himself will speak to God. Furthermore, he was told that this cheese was to never be sold or consumed, but to be saved for the end of time, saved for God Almighty himself. So when the end of time came, and nothing remained except God Almighty and this wheel of cheese, God said to the cheese, "I am going to eat you, but it will be nothing like your dream of hell. When I consume you, we will become one, and together we will create a new universe. But first, will you tell me that cheesy story of yours? It's one of my favorites, and I think hearing it one more time will help me fill this new world with even more peace, love, and joy than seems cheesily possible." The end.